Right, afternoon, evening, morning, everybody, wherever you are. My name's Phil Alexander. I'm the coordinator of these wide-ranging conversations on Zoom. Delighted to have Judith Cohen and Jessica Roda with us today. I just remind you, if you're not speaking, if you're not Judith or Jessica, please mute your microphone. I'm just going to introduce our two participants and then hand over to them for the conversation. Judith Cohen is an ethnomusicologist, a medievalist, a singer, an instrumentalist, and a storyteller. She holds a doctorate in ethnomusicology. Please mute your microphone if you're not talking. She holds a doctorate in ethnomusicology associated at Canadian, Israeli, and Portuguese universities. Judith is also the consultant and general editor of the Alan Lomax Spain 1952 collection and was the first Alan Lomax Fellow at the Library of Congress. She teaches part-time at York University, Toronto, and occasionally for the Aleph Alliance for Jewish Renewal Cantorial Programme. The author of many scholarly articles and book chapters, Judith has carried out fieldwork on Sephardic music in Europe, Morocco, Israel, and North America, and on village singing and women's hand drumming in Spain, Portugal, and French Canada. Her conversation partner today, Jessica Roda, is an anthropologist and ethnomusicologist and assistant professor in Jewish civilization at Georgetown University. Her research interests include religion, performing arts, cultural heritage, gender, and media. Her forthcoming monograph, Beyond the Sheitel, Jewish Women, Performances, and the Reshaping of Orthodoxy in the Digital Age, investigates how music, films, and media made by ultra-Orthodox and former ultra-Orthodox women act as agents of social, economic, and cultural changes and agency, challenging gender norms, orthodoxy, and liberalism. Jessica also trained as a pianist, flautist, and modern jazz dancer at the City of Paris Conservatory. Welcome to Judith and Jessica.
Well, thanks. Now, I was just sort of sitting there listening to it all. You know, it sounds so interesting. Like, we kind of sound like people I'd like to meet. But, so this is we were chatting about how to start this and what to do, and Jessica wrote me, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago and asked me to send some photos, and I did, and then I kind of forgot that I'd sent photos, and then I set up a little photo PowerPoint. So we have two sets of photos to use as jumping off points, and I think I'll start with a whole bunch of mine, and then I'll come back to them at the end because there's lots, and you can ask questions, and in between, Jessica's going to bring up the ones that she selected. So just in case you're wondering how we met, or even if you weren't wondering how we met, I think it was 2005, Jessica, something like that. I was in Paris and I walked into the, what was it called at the time, the Fonds de Musique Juive, what was it?
It was the Institute, so now is the Institut de Musique Juive, European Institute of Jewish Music, directed by Hervé Roten. It was in 2006, and you actually came to give us your recording, the new album.
Right.
It was Sephard in Diaspora. And yeah, can I say some words?
Sure.
Here, Judith, before we start the conversation, I prepared a short text to introduce Judith, because I think it's, everybody here knows Judith, but I think I give some personal words, because I think that Judith's Cohen journey offers a unique testimony to the transformation of ethnomusicology over the past 5 decades between Europe and North America, and also between the French-speaking and English-speaking world, and as well as the female experience in the discipline. And this is something that I wanted to say because, not so many people navigate French, English, Spanish, Portuguese, Quebec, Ontario, Canada, French, English, and also Europe. So this is something that I wanted to say. And as you mentioned, Judith, we've met in Paris in 2006 when you came to present your the new album Sephard in Diaspora. And so in this album, you singing with your daughter, with Tamar Ilana Cohen. I think it's important also to mention because there is something very unique in your experience. And like your first album, this volume was the result of many years of fieldwork, research and analysis of Sephardic repertoire, traveling between the United States, Canada, Israel, Spain, Morocco, and Portugal. And since that time, 2006, we became friends. And also our interests for the music and the Judeo-Spanish world were transcended by our common, knowledge and also love maybe for Montreal. This is something that also, connect us. And I remember that, throughout this years, you telling me, sharing so many anecdotes about the transformation of ethnomusicology in Canada, in the US, and we had the chance to meet in all over the world, in Kazakhstan, in Morocco, United States, Israel, and Canada. If I can add some few words also, I remember the first day we've met. I remember strong personality, never concealing her thoughts, with a fine humor that sometimes is difficult to pinpoint between, I would say, Ashkenazi, Montreal Jewish cultures, Quebecois, Spanish, Sephardic. Judith is a bit of all of this at the same time. And I wrote that you are a multifaceted personality who can be understood in the intimacy of her relationship to others, to the field, and to music. Judith is one of those close to the field researchers who cannot be imagined elsewhere, a form of fusion that waves with the people she meets. Through her commitment to research and performance, she illustrates the ethnomusicology of encounter, ethnomusicology of experience, and reciprocity. She is this researcher with whom you can spend hours listening to her experience from the past that take you through time and places. I would say that courage, adventure, merit, and being audacious are words that really suit her. So from her hometown of Montreal, in the heart of Ashkenazi Jewish family, Judith Quinn went on an adventure before the fall of Berlin Wall in Eastern Europe. Then she continued her journey and travels over the years, at first alone, then with her daughter, Tamar, who participated in all her field trips, navigating between multi-seated fieldwork, writings, the stage, and the recording studio, which is very unique for an ethnomusicologist. Judith Cohen has an unprecedented power of narration, this gift of revealing the encounter with the other, all with a touch of irony and humor. So this conversation today invites you to discover her extraordinary career between performance practice and field research between North America and Europe, between Quebec and Ontario, and to understand how Judeo-Spanish music through the eyes of ethnomusicology has changed over time. And just to start, and now I'm going to give the voice to Judith, but I really wanted to give you, some context about Judith, even if you all know her. So this is a photo that I wanted to share. I guess this is maybe connected to the beginning of your career. So Judith, can you tell us first about this photo, what it says about you, and how I would say maybe everything started for you in this path of integrating performance practice and field research?
Thanks for all these things, Jessica. I don't even really recognize myself in half of them. But I will say that when I met you, Jessica, that first day, what struck me right away was how absolutely brilliant you were. I mean, all you did was say 10 words and bring me something, some documentation I'd asked for. But there was something about it that I knew right away that you weren't just any student intern working somewhere. And so it's great to have become colleagues over all these years. So actually, being disorganized, I thought we said I was going to show a whole bunch of my photos first, and then you were going to go and zero in on some of them. So,
as you want.
So I'll give you all a brief, where's Waldo moment. You can look at this photo and make sure you know where I am in it, and then we'll come back to it. Probably twice, because I'll show it quickly and then we'll come back to it again. So what I'm going to do, if you unshare, is I'm going to go through a whole bunch right now, and without saying much about them, and then we'll come back to the details. So here we go. These, as you might guess, are my parents. My father died when I was 5 years old, so I didn't get to know him very well, but this is my father long before he met my mother in 1930 or so, playing the banjo with his brother, my uncle Solly, on the main, behind the family shoe store, Cohen's shoe store on St. Lawrence, right opposite, actually, Jessica, where the Musée du Montréal Juif used to be. And summer camp, where we learned all kinds of songs. The songs we learned in summer camp were about half the new, at the time they were new in the 1950s, the new songs from Israel, you know, Erev Shoshanim and all those songs, but also all the songs of the civil rights movement in the United States. So we were Canadian Jewish kids. It wasn't per se a leftist summer camp, which some were, but a lot of our counselors just played guitar and banjo, and they taught us all that song. So in my mind, somehow all these songs and beautiful melodies of, you know, the Israeli Eretz songs of the 1950s are meshed with the songs of the civil rights movement. And I think, although I didn't think of it as formative, it was formative. And at the same time, my mother's father, my maternal grandfather from Vilna, was taking me to his old synagogue, and I would hear all the really beautiful old melodies there. And I was a co-founder of the high school folk song club. I also played clarinet in the high school band. And I found this, I was about 12 when I wrote this, or 13. And my high school teacher, Mr. Peacock, my French teacher, had been talking to us. And so I wrote, this is my editorial in the Jewish Y Teen Digest, 1964. So I was older, I was 14. Do you feel like a hypocrite when you sing "We Shall Overcome" or "Go Tell It on the Mountain"? According to my French teacher, whose name will be kept anonymous, he was Donald Peacock, the first atheist to be permitted to join as an atheist as a board member of the Protestant School Board of Greater Montreal. You should. His philosophy is that one should not sing songs such as these unless one is committed to act as the words of the song suggest, to devote one's life to doing so. I would like some opinions on this. So I was astonished to find this all these years later, this was 1964, and see how so many of the themes that we're all talking about now were already being discussed that way. Back then, I left our names: editor-in-chief, me; associate editor, Alan Schachter, Mike Goodman, Murray Fisher, Harriet Singers. Then I started traveling in 1970, so I was 20, and for the ignoble reason, totally ignoble reason, that my girlfriend Edith said that her Serbian boyfriend, at the time we just said Yugoslavian boyfriend, had broken up with her, and she wanted to see if all Yugoslav men were such jerks or if he was an exception. So I'm sorry that it started in that, you know, as I said, ignoble fashion, but that's how my traveling overseas began. But we went to the library, we took out books on art, and we bought maps, and we made a list of all the frescoes in Macedonia and Kosovo and all the things that we wanted to see. We had no money. We got to Milan and hitchhiked to then Yugoslavia and hitchhiked for 2 months. And we met Esma Recepova. I didn't have a camera, but we actually met Esma in a village singing at the time. And when I went back, I was to Montreal, I was kind of committed to traveling. So after I finished my bachelor's, I got a one-way ticket to Paris, and I ended up living in Spain for a while, teaching French, eventually taking the boat. This is a postcard. This is the postcard I sent to my Zayda, to my grandfather in 1972 from Turkey. Look, I was invited to a synagogue. There were guards at the doors who ask if you're Jewish in Hebrew. And they checked my handbag, and I could just barely answer them in Hebrew. No, I don't speak much Hebrew. So, and I kept this journal, which I still have. And I've been going through, as Vanessa knows, Vanessa's here, for a project. So let me just see if I can, how come I can't, where are my arrows gone? All my arrows have disappeared. Hold on, let me just see. Slideshow, next slide. Oh, because that doesn't work that way. Hold on, let me stop the share and bring it back again, because something odd has happened to my PowerPoint and the controls are on. This is a very, very old computer. As Jessica knows, I actually spent a very, very long time trying to get it moving before the Zoom started. I just like it because that's disappeared. I like it because it's got a big screen. Well, you know what, Jessica, we may end up being going back to yours.
My photos. Okay, great, wonderful.
And then I'll work out this and come back.
Great. Can you see the okay, this photo, or, oh, you're sharing it.
Hold on, I'll stop share. Here we go.
Okay, so now I'm gonna share the photos. So you just, started to give us a certain idea that you were traveling a lot, right? At that time, and but you didn't talk about, of course, music, the songs, the family, but how everything started. Can you tell us, because the other important element is that you started as a performer of medieval music, right? You did your BA in medieval studies at McGill.
No, not at all. I did my bachelor's. I started off in French and philosophy, and then I switched to English lit. That was my bachelor's. And then
Oh,
I did a second bachelor after I traveled in music. And then I did a master's in medieval studies before I did my PhD in ethnomusicology.
oh, so your BA was in philosophy
No,
and
my BA started out in philosophy and French, but then it switched to ordinary English lit.
literature. So where is music?
Well, I played clarinet in the high school band. I was a clarinetist. I switched from clarinet later on to Baroque recorder. I still play a lot of Baroque and Renaissance recorder. I went to summer camp. We sang all the time. As I said, we sang the civil rights songs. We sang silly songs. Oh, this is, by the way, I'll show you later, but this is actually a book of songs I typed out when I was about 12 years old of all the songs that we learned in summer camp. So I don't know, it was always there. I ran the folk song club in school. I was first clarinet in the high school band, but I didn't do music formally till my second bachelor's.
Okay, so this photo, what exactly is?
Okay, well, first of all, can anybody guess where it is? Since it's not labeled. You can guess in chat or you can briefly unmute as long as you mute again.
I remember you talking about this photo and that
Yeah, but
you
then
learned
you're not guessing. That's cheating, Vanessa.
Sorry. Okay, I'll zip.
But you can pretend you're guessing.
I won't pretend.
Nobody will know.
I'll let somebody else pretend.
No? Okay, what do you remember, Vanessa? Ah, Gibraltar or Dalmatia? Not too bad, Charles. I guess the rock is what made you think of Gibraltar. Vanessa, do you remember?
I think it's in Spain somewhere,
Yeah.
but that you learned a song, a fisherman, or a song about, and it's something, the women that were there were teaching you a song this afternoon. And it
Okay,
was in northern Spain somewhere, I think.
It was in Galicia for sure, a place called Malpica. It's right on the Atlantic. And I actually they're not teaching me a song, I was recording, but I didn't know the word ethnomusicology. I actually had not come across the term ethnomusicology. I didn't have a camera the first couple of times I traveled, but I had a little cassette recorder and I was actually, I don't think you can see it. Maybe you can. I'm actually holding a mic up. And they're singing while they mend their husband's nets. They're mending the fishermen's nets. And one of the songs they actually sang was, I'm going to Canada to see a pretty girl in Galician. Something like, Eu Canadá, Canadá, eu fui ao Canadá para ver uma nena. And I was there with a Catalan that had picked me up when I was hitchhiking from the east part of Spain. And it was actually quite funny. He said, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going to Galicia, but that's really far. Anywhere you want to drop me on the way is okay. And he said, well, I'm going to Galicia. Why are you going to Galicia? And I said, well, because I've never been there and I sort of want to hear what songs they sing. I know what songs they sing in Catalan and in Valencia, and I'm curious. And he said, well, I'm going to take black and white pictures. My girlfriend is singing with her choir in France, and I wanted something to do. I decided to see the other minority of Spain. And so we went together, and pretty atypically, just as I was wondering how we were going to handle this relationship, he actually said, but I'm going to be faithful to my girlfriend. We can travel together, but that's it. And jump ahead 40-something years, just before the pandemic started, they came to Canada for the first time, and they were sitting right here on this couch in this living room, he and the same girlfriend who is now his wife.
Wow. And you spoke already Spanish at that time?
Yeah, well, I had got to Spain for the first time a year and a half before in fall of 71 when this journal starts. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know Spanish, but I knew French and I had 7 years of Latin. So it was pretty easy to pick up.
Yeah. And who's taking the photo?
Jordi, the Catalan.
Oh, the Catalan. Okay, so that's the. You didn't hear about ethnomusicology. Did you know about Sephardic songs or at the time?
Ah, well, that's sort of a jump. It's very interesting. It was oddly enough, I sort of knew because I'd been to Turkey by then. So you saw the postcard from Turkey. I'd been to Turkey, and somebody in the Grand Bazaar of Istanbul, I guess, looked at my profile and said to me, "Shalom." And I said, like, what do you mean shalom? Like, who says shalom in the middle of Turkey? This is 1972. And he said, well, aren't you Jewish? And he said, do you speak Spanish? And I said, yeah, I speak Spanish. And he switched to Ladino, which I didn't know existed. And he said, in what I just thought was a peculiar Spanish, but then my Spanish was pretty new, so I'd only known it a few months, so I wasn't thinking about it that much. He said, well, I'll invite you to supper at my family's house tonight, and you'll find out why we're here. So that was actually my introduction. But oddly enough, in the boat to Turkey, and I'm trying to find this, I can't find it, but I know that in the boat to Turkey from Barcelona, I decided I was going to keep a journal. And, you know, with the arrogance of youth, I kind of thought people would want to read my journal. So I would write in a way that nobody could read it. So I made up a brand new language. I decided I would write it in this newly acquired language of mine, Spanish, with Hebrew characters, which nobody had ever thought of and would ever think of reading.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love this story. I didn't know about this. That's something. And so that's this photo. We're in Spain. You never heard about ethnomusicology. You heard about, Judeo-Spanish. I mean, this idea of Spanish, of Jews speaking in, a language that is a kind of a Spanish, right?
Yeah, actually on that same trip, this is 1973. So on that same trip, Jordi, my friend who is a teacher, said that some of his fellow teachers who were from Galicia were having a party, and did I want to go? And I said, yeah, sure. So we went to this house on the beach of Galicia near Vigo. And one of the young men there, about my age, I didn't think of him as a young man. I just thought of him as a guy my age. He was a bagpiper, a Galician bagpiper and insurance agent, I found out later. And he said, oh, you're Jewish and you speak Spanish. We have someone here in Spain, Joaquin Diaz, who sings all these Sephardic songs. Do you want me to give you a copy of my cassettes of him? And he actually mailed me, when I got back to Canada, a package, like a physical package, with 2 cassettes of Sephardic songs by Joaquin Diaz. So they were actually my first recordings of Sephardic songs, though I'd heard a couple of songs that this family in Angara sang for me when I was there in Turkey.
Wow, fascinating. And so you were in Montreal, and there was also some member of this community. Did you know about?
Only very vaguely. After my father died, my mother became an insurance agent, and she worked for an Ashkenazi Jewish man who, as soon as the Moroccan Jews started arriving, he said, well, I'm going to hire as many as I can because their French is so beautiful and they're so cosmopolitan, and they'll really help me expand my business. And one day my mother came home from work. I was about 10 maybe or 11, so it was 1960, 61, something like that. And she said, oh, it's so interesting. This man came to work in our office and he speaks French and Arabic, but he's Jewish. Isn't that interesting? And he doesn't speak any Yiddish at all. And he says his wife is going to make some special pastries, enough for everybody in the office. And that was it. That was actually my first inkling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so like Turkey, Spain, you go back to. I'm trying to, to create the puzzle about how you came to, performing, singing in, in Judeo-Spanish, and also writing about this music. I have another photo after this one, because you mentioned music was always there. Not necessarily formally. It's only when you did your master in medieval studies at McGill. Now I'm right?
No, I did my undergraduate studies at McGill. No, I did one at McGill, the second at Concordia, and then the medieval studies I did as a master's at Université de Montréal.
Oh, it was at UDM, the medieval studies.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about this photo at the center. So you were performing medieval music, right?
Okay, so she's not in the photo because she was teaching in Singapore that year that we took the photo. I think this was 1980. But I ran into Susan Palmer, who was playing harpsichord at a concert, and we started chatting. And then the next summer, she went to Ireland and came back with an Irish harp and said, look, I have a harp. Let's do some medieval music. And at that point, Jordi, the Catalan, who I was in Galicia with, I'd been back to Barcelona, and he took me up to Montserrat, and I got a photocopy of the Llibre Vermell, the 10 beautiful, fantastic 14th century songs in Latin and Catalan of the manuscript of Montserrat, and I was involved in medieval music, and I was doing medieval music at Concordia. And so I said to Susan, oh, what a great idea, let's do some medieval songs. And then we met Ariane, who's a friend of Susan's, and is still they're all really good friends still. And then somehow we met Michel Sauvé, who is, for many years, has lived in Paris as a violinist. We had a Saint-Square, a reunion a few years ago. And she's holding one of my Rebecs. I don't know if you can see it on the wall behind me. And then Suzy Leblanc is playing my psaltery. She was a teenager then, and she's now the director of Early Music Vancouver. So we formed this group. It was originally just me, Susan, and Ariane. And then we got a fourth person who was a guy, just by chance, a lute player. And then he left town, and so we replaced him with someone else who happened to be a woman. And people started saying to us, this was like the early 70s, 75, 70, 76, late 70s, 77. Oh, you're a medieval women's group. That's so cute. And so we looked around at each other and we went, 1, 2, oh yeah, we're all women. Okay, whatever, sure. Yeah, we're a medieval women's group. And then I did a degree because people kept saying, well, did women sing and perform in the Middle Ages? And I kept saying, well, why wouldn't they? And then finally I went and did a master's thesis on women performers and musicians in the Middle Ages in Spain and France and Portugal, in the Muslim, Jewish, and Christian communities. And this was long before internet and long before the whole thing about the 3 cultures and the 3 religions and so on. I just, as far as I knew, it was like creating Ladino on the boat. Nobody had ever thought of this before.
Yeah, so I don't, I'm trying to, okay, I'm going to stop sharing because otherwise it's going to show already all the photos that I wanted to share. I'm just going to, there is something going wrong in my PowerPoint now.
Yeah, you too, eh? Because I couldn't find the arrows in mine.
Okay, can you see? So we are here. Okay, so that's the medieval, medieval piece. But beside, so on the left, you have, I decided to have, this slide with Judith as a performer. So on the left, you're playing the oud. So you are kind of, would you say that you're a multi-instrumentist? Because you're playing a lot of different instruments, Judith, and you learn several instruments throughout your career. Here on the left, you have the oud. Can you tell us about maybe if I recall properly, you came also, or you were in Montreal when Sami El-Maghrebi was teaching the oud. For those who do not know Sami El-Maghrebi, Salomon Amzalak, he was the Khazan at the Spanish and Portuguese and a very important star in Morocco. And I, if I recall properly, you took some lessons with him, or with whom did you learn the oud?
Yeah. So yes, Sami was in Montreal, and what happened is I was actually at a concert of his right when I was beginning my dissertation in Sephardic music. So I went to it's the concert, you know which one it was because you saw the poster up at the exhibit we did. And so I just went up to him afterwards. I had no idea who he was, much less how famous he was. And I said, oh, would you teach me oud? And he looked very surprised because he didn't teach oud. That's not what he did. And he said, well, I guess I can. And so I had several lessons with him at his house and in his office. And then he passed me on to one of his other musicians, to Selim Azra.
Did you speak in English or in French?
Always French. And one of the stories I think I did tell you is that when I would meet him at the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in his office, one of the times I was there, the King of Morocco phoned him. And well, his secretary or whatever you call it, phoned him directly. And so Sami said in French, Oh, yes, of course, I can speak to His Majesty anytime. I'm teaching a Canadian student, but she's not important, she'll just wait. And then he looked at me, and when he saw that I was sufficiently astonished, and my jaw had dropped sufficiently to the ground, then he switched to Arabic, and I have no idea what he said, but he talked to the king for quite a while. And he did switch back to French for a bit and sort of look at me to see if I was impressed, because he said something like, "Oh, they treat me very well here in Canada, Your Majesty. The Prime Minister invites me to sing quite often, and he's very kind and very polite, but he doesn't have the deep knowledge of music that Your Majesty has. Very few people could have that," said Sonny. And then he switched back to Arabic when he saw that my jaw was trailing along the floor,
Yeah, so that's fascinating to see that you were a performer, first of all, and then you how was it to keep, because throughout your career you continue to be a performer, and also then you decided to integrate research. There was not that many, and also you had your daughter. So how was it to combine, performance, being on stage, doing research, and being a woman at that time?
Let me try and go back to my PowerPoint and see if it'll work this time, because I think it'll answer some of those questions. Hopefully it'll work this time. If you stop share and I start share, let's see if I can get it to function properly this time. Let's see. Okay, so if you go to the second one, here, shortly after I switched from clarinet to Baroque recorder, these are my two sisters, and we're playing, as I remember, a Mozart sonata arranged for two flutes and clarinet or something like that. Here we're playing at my sister's wedding. This is the bride playing the clarinet. And anybody who knows Yiddish, guess what song we're singing? You're probably right. You just have to know the basic Yiddish repertoire. I'll give you a hint. My sister who got married in this picture is the youngest of us. Yes, Isabel? Unmute, yes.
Die Mazinke ausgegeben.
You got it in one. That's what we were singing. The youngest daughter is married off, and we were singing it. And the youngest daughter was playing clarinet at her own wedding. This is another manifestation of the medieval group doing French Canadian dances, which I also did for quite a while. Medieval music on three-hole pipe and tabor, Balkan music, and my Balkan singing group that I ran for many years here in Toronto. Here's that same photo that Jessica was showing you, and also that first year in Spain, someone else took this picture. This is with Jordi interviewing a bunch of Gitanos. They don't call themselves Roma, so-called gypsies. A little bit later on in Andalusia, festival in Portugal, a Bosnian Muslim family who took us in when we were really kind of in some danger in 1979, and I refound them some years ago, and we had a great reunion. Here I am with an old telephone. Samuel Maghribi, I don't have any pictures of my lessons with him, but I do have a couple of cassettes of recordings. I'll let you talk about Giardinello later, Jessica, so here's, just so you know, this is my old Moroccan Sephardic ensemble, Giardinello. Buena Sarfati Garfinkel of Salonika, who's become quite a COZ celeb, but I interviewed her early on in the 1980s. Here you can see the Ewer reel-to-reel tape recorder that we had to use in first year ethnomusicology fieldwork. The university issued them, and this is Vanessa, this is a woman from the Alcazar Kivir, from the Ksar al-Kivir community, Esther Hatchuel, that Hatchuel. And women from Tangier, Hana Pimienta, Larache, Julia Jimol Edrie, and Rahma Azraf. And Lucy Keirub, I think, was also from Al-Qasar. Nina Shalom Vuchkovic, who was an astonishing story. This is a whole separate story, but she was Bosnian Sephardic living on a Mohawk reservation outside Montreal. And I won't even get into that now because it takes too long. Flori Jagoda, whom we'll talk about because I saw Jessica had another photo of her. Jessica has this photo up, so we'll deal with it then. Fieldwork on what I call the Ladino bus in Turkey, many years after I was first in Turkey without knowing about Ladino, and Yiddish. Solomon Ari was singing old Yiddish songs, and I started collecting from him. And then moving on, Roma, this is a very, very famous family of Roma who I met in Spain. Their son is the famous singer Aziz in Bulgaria. but I actually met his father, Troyan, when he was busking with accordion on the streets of Madrid. And I took out what I think of as an emergency tambourine and started playing all the Balkan rhythms with him. And he offered to share the money. And I said, no, 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 I'm just having fun. So he said, oh, well, just come home and have dinner with us. So I stayed very good friends with him and his wife. And they subsequently moved back to Bulgaria. And this is my daughter and myself having dinner with them at a special ritual meal to establish the bridal price for a young woman who had to be married off because she'd spent too much time with a guy she wasn't married to. And these are with a crypto-Jewish family in Belmont, Portugal. This is also crypto-Jewish fieldwork, and the Ciganos, the so-called gypsies who live near them. And here I thought, you can tell me which ones of these are the real wedding occasions. So this is a real wedding that took place in Toronto for a Moroccan Jewish woman. And so that, you know, she's all dressed up in the traditional Moroccan Jewish wedding dress, and they asked me to come and sing. This is not a real wedding, of course. This is, I was documenting a medieval festival in Teruel, Spain, as part of a project on the use of Sephardic music in medieval festivals of the so-called three cultures. And then at the last minute, it turned out that the musicians didn't bring a singer. So Kali in the picture, Raquel, asked me if I would sing. She said, oh, can you just pull out a 13th century song that could have been heard by the bride in Aragon? And I said, well, yeah, okay. And then this is my poor daughter when she was about 6 in Jerusalem. The wonderful singer Betty Klein had a gig at that Jerusalem restaurant that was supposed to be Roman over the Cardo. And since we didn't know nobody knows any songs from, you know, ancient Roman times, Betty said, well, just sing some medieval Sephardic songs and then we'll do Tsena Tsena. This is not a wedding. This is the fake medieval Jewish Sephardic wedding in the Ribadavia, Galicia. The rabbi and the groom, this is again my long-suffering daughter, the rabbi and the groom are actually now married to each other. At the time they were engaged, but gay weddings were not yet permitted in Spain, and as soon as they were, the same couple is now married. And this is a real wedding in Morocco, where not that long ago, 2014 in Larache, where I didn't take as many pictures as I wanted to because these same women who gave me the dress to wear, they didn't like my dress, said, would you stop filming and start dancing already? You can film again later. And so that's, you know, a sort of, I think there's maybe one more, or is that it? That might be all of it. Yeah, so that's a kind of just general overview. But what I wanted to say was that I didn't really do much of this deliberately. It all kind of just happened, as it were. I never really said, now I'm going to do this. Now I guess I did about Sephardic music eventually because I had to do a doctorate and I had to choose a topic. But that was partly Samuel Armistead's doing. He was the one who sort of spurred me into that.
So yeah, maybe let's go back to why you decided to focus and to write a PhD on Sephardic music. And in Montreal as well. You know, you did the only research that has been done on this repertoire in Montreal. So can you tell us a little bit about this choice?
Well, what happened is when I started my master's in medieval studies, I was at the McGill Library. And this is one thing I sort of miss about old school libraries. I love the internet, you know, obviously I use it all the time. But I was browsing the new books shelf. I was picking up new books and thumbing through them. And they were just the new books that happened to be on the shelf. And one was that book by Armistead, which is the chapbooks of Abraham Yonah in Salonika. And I thought, oh, this looks really interesting. And, you know, I've been to Greece. I know where Salonika is. And, oh, it looks kind of neat. So I took it home and it was so brilliantly written that I just read through the whole thing like a detective novel. And then I wrote a fan letter, a real old-fashioned fan letter to Sam Armistead. Again, like Samuel Maghribi, I had no idea how famous he was and how revered he was. And I just said, you know, I read your book and it's really great and I'm starting a master's thesis and he wrote back, I have the letter, right away on an old-fashioned typewriter, you know, the old kind where there's a red ribbon so the bottoms of the letters are red. So he wrote back on this old typewriter 3 pages of single-spaced letter saying, well, if you're doing a master's on women in music and the 3 religions of medieval Iberia, you should read, And the next 2 pages were annotated bibliography. And this guy had never heard of me before. I was just some random, whatever. And then he said, I can be on your committee if you like. And I'm in Philadelphia. It's before he moved to California. So next time you go to New York, if you ever there, tell me ahead of time and take the train to Philadelphia and I'll show you some things. And what? Like, who is this? And so next time I was in New York, he was on my thesis committee. He didn't want any money or anything. He said, oh, this is so interesting. Let me, help you out with this. And then I went to see him in Philadelphia, and I wish I had taken a picture of this. It was classic Sam Armistead, anybody who knew him. He passed away in 2013. He had that patch over one eye, I think from a chemistry experiment in high school gone wrong. And he was classic absent-minded professor, he was sort of skinny, and his suit sort of hung this way on this shoulder and this way on that shoulder, and he was wearing a tie, sort of, and his hair was kind of like almost that old comic Dagwood, And he took me into his office and he gave me this article and this book and that book. And then he put on a bunch of tapes, reel-to-reel tapes of his fieldwork. This is before anything was digitized. This was 79, I guess, 78, something like that. And they were his Sephardic tapes. So he would put on one after another, and he sat there with his eyes closed in a chair in this office with all the books and all the files and everything falling all over each other. And he sang along with every single song from memory. And then he said, well, you live in Montreal. You should probably meet my former student, Oroana Hori-Librovich. She just finished her dissertation with me on Moroccan Sephardic ballads from a linguistic point of view, not a musical point of view. And then he said, and so when you start your doctorate, and I said, what doctorate? I'm out of here. I'm done with academia. I'll finish my master's and I'm gone. I don't want any more academia. Stop laughing, Naomi. Stop laughing, everybody. I'm not doing any more academia. I'm still saying that 40 years down the road. He said, so you can do it on Sephardic music because it really needs you. And I said, I'm not doing a doctorate on anything. And he said, well, call Oro. So I phoned Oro and she said, well, do you speak Spanish as well as French? We were speaking French. She said, do you also speak Spanish? And I said, yeah. And so she switched to Spanish to check it out. And then she said, what instruments do you play? And I said, well, I play... this is actually my main string instrument, the medieval vielle, the medieval bowed vielle, and I play a little bit of oud, and I play, some... Oh, by the way, Michael and everybody else, the reason I played darbuka and frame drum was that Zev Feldman was my teacher in the early 70s in Montreal, through meeting him through Bulgarian folk dancing, but that's like another story, as they say. And so Ora said, well, I'm forming this group and I already have Soli Levi who's singing and his soloist from the Kinor Choir, Kelly Sultan Amar, and we need somebody else to do a sort of second woman's voice and play all the instruments and be our kind of resident, educated musician. Can you do that? And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. So I became their token Ashkenazi and their token hippie and their token feminist. And the reason I'm saying this is that that's how Oro sometimes introduced me. We'd be in a Sephardic context and she'd say, eh, bon, ici c'est Judith, c'est notre hippie et notre féministe, mais ça va. Et elle est Ashkenaz, mais bon, ça va, c'est pas mal, ça va quand même. So I'm not making this up. I was like the resident token hippie feminist, although I'm not a very good hippie and not a very good feminist. Like I never learned how to smoke dope or anything. And so on. Anyway, that's kind of how Geronello got formed and how I started doing my dissertation on Sephardic music.
Wow.
And also knowing medieval music put me in a position where when people started going on about, Sephardic songs frozen in amber from some random date that they assign, this is the 13th century, this is the 14th century, this is the 11th century, whatever. I could say, no, it's not medieval. There's no earthly way this melody is medieval. There's no earthly way this poem is medieval. Or even a ballad, a narrative ballad, a romance, whose text does go back to the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance, what people are now calling early modern. I won't say that. The tunes changed so many times over the years and over the centuries that I started saying to people, to me, a song is both, has a vocal aspect. It can be, a nigun that doesn't need words per se, but it's got something you do with your voice and it's got a tune. If it's just a tune, it's a tune. If it's just words, it's a poem. If it's a song, it's got something that you do with your voice, whether it's actual words or it's syllables or it's humming or whatever, and it's got a tune. So Sephardic songs, Ladino songs might have words in some cases, not the popular, love songs of the late 19th century, but ballads and some wedding songs do, of course, have words that go back to pre-expulsion or around the expulsion time, but not the tunes. But knowing medieval music actually put me in a position to be able to say that, and also to recognize, from having traveled in the Balkans so much, to recognize Balkan tunes and rhythms and so on when they showed up as contrafacts.
So how was it, Judith? Because you were in the medieval, musical sphere, and at that time there was this discourse of, Sephardic music, Judeo-Spanish song from the medieval time, and then
It still is.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, how was it for you navigating this romantic discourse and then being part of this, of Gerineldo? And I'm going to share a photo here because I want to talk a little bit about Gerineldo. What is fascinating in your your journey is really like how your discovery, your research is always into the practice, into doing and playing and understanding through experience. So how was it to be coming from the medieval sphere and knowing, I mean, I'm sure at that time, you started to, they were all saying that the repertoire that Gerineldo eventually were singing, and maybe also does Gerineldo was trying, or some people within the group trying to use this label because it sells also, or you were completely out of this discourse?
We were completely outside that discourse. I don't think the word medieval crossed our lips unless we were specifically talking about a ballad whose lyrics could be traced. And how could they be traced? The simplest way to trace anything before the internet in terms of ballads was to phone Sam Armistead, including in the middle of the night because he was always up. And he would say, let me phone you back and pay for the call. I don't want you paying for this call. And he would phone you back and he would first ask how your family was and how things were. And then he would say, so what do you want to ask me? And you would say, when did this ballad first show up in a manuscript or an early printed edition? And he would say, well, it doesn't really show up before 1471 when it shows up. And he would reel off all the numbers of the manuscripts and where they were held and tell you all the variations and so on. So unless we were talking about a specific ballad, and Oro, of course, wrote her dissertation on these ballads. So she had a lot of this information at her fingertips, and Sam was her thesis advisor. And, I was doing research, so I knew how to look things up. And, between Oro and myself doing a lot of research, and Solly being a very realistic person, even though he was also a theater person. And Kelly just sang. Kelly was, I'm just smiling because Kelly is the only one that we never argued with. Oro and I argued all the time, like good friends argue all the time. Solly and everybody argued all the time, and everybody absolutely adored him. But Kelly was just our beautiful singer, and she just, I don't know, she just didn't argue. She just said, sure, I'll sing that. And she would sing it. So that's how we worked. And we had one other person with us for many years. We had Charlie Edrie, who was a really, really good oud player. I'm not a good oud player, and I'm not saying that to be modest. I'm just not a good oud player. I don't put time into it. I don't really practice. I'm, kind of competent. But if there's a good oud player around, I'd vastly prefer them playing. So we got Charlie, who's also a violinist and makes his own violins and also plays oud and plays percussion. He's a Moroccan, partly Amazigh, Israeli Jew. So he's really got all those musical cultures together. So he was with us for quite a while. But the core group of the four of us never, ever changed. And in this photo, which is many years later, this is around 1980, 82 maybe, 81, 82, maybe 82. No, it's a bit later because Oro had cut her hair. It's got to be at least 82, 83. She's had much longer hair than I do. And this photo is from 2014. This is the last concert we did before Solly got sick and he passed away about a year and a half ago. So Kelly couldn't come with us because it was actually exactly 20 years since we had played together, but 20 years since the death of her husband. And she just never wanted to sing again after her husband died, even though her rabbi, in fact, encouraged her to after the first year was over. So we have my daughter, whom you saw in all those little pictures when I kept saying my long-suffering daughter. So this is my growing up, still long-suffering daughter, who is now a professional singer and dancer and music producer and innovator and so on in her own right, Tamar Ilana. And this is Solly's grandson, Matan, who is a wonderful piyut singer. So you have three generations, Oro, myself, Sally, my daughter, and Sally's grandson. And they're all, if you notice, holding instruments from this wall or from behind me. And Dimitrios is a Greek musician who performs a lot in Toronto. There's no style he can't handle well, so he substituted for Charlie. But we hadn't played together for 20 years when they called us from Paris, going back to how I met you, Jessica, when they called us from the Jewish community, Moroccan Jewish community of Paris. And Lina Amslem and Avram Benjio said, would you like to come back and, have a revival? And the first concert in Paris was 20 years to the day since our last concert before that.
Yeah. Judith, how was the reception of the Gehineldo in Montreal? Can you tell us about the musical scene? And you did the fieldwork in Montreal in the 80s. How was it? How was Sephardic life, Judeo-Spanish repertoire at the time in Montreal?
It was interesting. No one knew much about it, and there were very, very few Sephardim from the Eastern Mediterranean in Montreal at the time. There are some more now, but it was never huge. And at the time, there were probably fewer than 100. There was Buena Sarfati Garfinkel, whose picture I showed you from Salonika, and she always said that she felt very alone.
Mm-hmm.
There had been an earlier sort of Sephardic descendant immigration to Montreal in the 18th century. As soon as Jews were allowed in, as soon as it moved from the French to the English control and Jews were allowed in and Protestants were allowed in, but they kind of assimilated very quickly into the general community. So this was really not till the 1950s and 60s. I did a lot of fieldwork in the senior citizens clubs, the Sephardic senior citizens golden age clubs, le Club Séfarade d'Âge d'Or et le Club Amitié. And you know this, of course, Jessica, because I said it before, but I recorded quite a lot of things at bingo games. So you would have all these ladies who were, 65, 70, 75, very vital, very dynamic, but not used to Montreal winters. So a little van would pick them up in their apartments and bring them to the Y, to the Jewish Y. And they had, a couple of nice rooms all set out, and they would have bingo and tea and cookies, and they would sing while they were actually playing bingo. And, I have one recording of a ballad of Diego Leon that gets faster and faster, and the pitch goes up as the bingo game gets more exciting. And I remember that one of them would always say, whenever she would say 69, 69, 69, 69, Brigitte Bardot. So, but they knew a lot. Like what I would do is I would sort of figure out the ones who, from the group, who knew more, and I would ask permission to go and interview them in their homes later. So out of that lot at the club, there were, I don't know, half a dozen that I went back to quite often, and who told me all kinds of things about wedding practices and stories and sang songs and so on. And my only regret is that at the time, we didn't take as many photos as we do now. And I didn't get my first camcorder video recorded till 91. So I don't have as much visual documentation as I would like to from that time. And the very, very first Sephardic ballad I recorded, which I was going to mention and forgot, I don't have a picture of this woman at all. I just posted on the Facebook, Friends of Jews of Larache, if anybody can hook me up to her family. She was Mercedes Bochbot, and I was actually singing Yiddish songs. And Michael, I can tell you exactly which song it was that we'd been asked to learn. We were singing Yiddish songs for a Jewish senior citizens, summer program outside Montreal. And I don't know why I got asked. I wasn't a specialist in Yiddish, but I knew some songs. And we were singing Bist du mit mir Bräuges. Bist du mit mir Bräuges, weiß ich nicht, was that one. And so we were singing all these songs, and this one woman said to me in French, do you know French? And I said, yeah. And she said, do you know Spanish too? And I said, oh, yes, this was 74. I had only just been to Spain, those times with that I told you about in the pictures. And right away, she sang me this fantastic version of the old narrative ballad of Landarico. And you can hear they're clearing the table in the dining room behind her. So, you sort of hear all these, extraneous sounds of cups and saucers. And then her friend who was sitting next to her, whose name I didn't get, you can hear her echoing every line on the tape. I was really lucky. I had a cassette player with me. No camera, but I had a cassette recorder. And the friend figured that my Spanish wasn't very good, so she would make it better by repeating every line. So what you hear on the tape is Mercedes sings, Levantóse el rey a casar. And then you hear, levantóse el rey a casar. Un lunes por la mañana. Un lunes por la mañana. So that's how the tape goes. It's not your pristine studio tape or anything, but that was actually the first one I learned. And what I did want to go back to about that first year in Spain before I forget, which conditioned a lot of how I saw Spain after that, is I got there by sheer chance to Spain the first time. And I got there because when we were on that trip to Yugoslavia with my girlfriend, figuring out whether all Yugoslav men were, you know, creeps like, what was his name? Dragica, I think. I was practicing Baroque recorder because I was switching from clarinet to recorder, and I was practicing a Handel sonata on a rooftop at a pension in Sarajevo. And we were actually at that rooftop because an epidemiologist, I know it sounds random, that I was working with when I was Secretary of Epidemiology in Montreal, was from Sarajevo. Michael is shaking his head. And he said, well, if you're really going to Sarajevo, you can stay at my friend's cheap pension. So that's why we were there, and I was practicing Handel. And this guy runs up, it was 7 a.m. because it was, you know, nothing was happening then except laundry drying. And he ran up and said in French, without asking me if I spoke French, how come you're playing a Handel sonata on this rooftop in Sarajevo? And I said, how come you even know that this is a Handel sonata? And he turned out to be a young Jewish secular music teacher from Geneva, and he and his wife were on their way to buy hippie clothes in Afghanistan to open the first hippie store in Geneva. And he gave me, it's a long, long story, but he gave me the name of a painter friend who'd studied in Geneva in this village in Spain, and the name of some people in Romania. And they're all still friends, all of them. So when I got to Spain, I didn't know Spanish. And I just went because it got cold, and I was traveling for a year after my first bachelor's degree, and I thought, well, it's getting cold, I can either buy a coat or go to Spain. I had no idea what Franco was or fascism was, like nothing. I just didn't know anything about this. I was as ignorant as you can get. And I get to the border and pull out my Spanish dictionary and, you know, ask where this village is, and I got there. And I ended up, first I went to Morocco, and I traveled to Andalusia for a while, and then I went back and taught English and French for a while in the village. And so it was under the Franco regime still. And they taught me all about what it was to speak Valenciano and Catalan and the minority languages under Franco, and what the section femenina was, and so on and so forth. They didn't know anything about Jews at all. Like there was a family in the village that I was friendly with, an older woman and her husband, who said to me at Easter time, well, which of the 2 churches in the village do you go to? And I said, I don't go to either church. And they said, well, you go to one. It's Easter, so we just need to know whether to get you a seat at our family church. And I said, well, I don't go to either church because I'm Jewish. And they said, well, whatever you are, you're Jewish, you're whatever, which church do you go to? Because they just hadn't, there's no internet. They just had not seen a live Jew. In Madrid, they would have. I mean, people knew that they were Jews at the synagogue in Madrid. They kept a low profile, but they knew they were in Barcelona. But in the villages, they literally just had no concept of what a Jew was. They had a concept of what a Jew used to be. And yeah, they had horns and they were bizarre and peculiar and a really weird kind of Christian, is what I sort of figured out in the villages over the years. But that was my first encounter with Jewish Spain, actually. And even when Jordi and I went to Galicia in 73, it was still under Franco. And they would stop us in the villages and ask to see our family, our libreta de familia, our family documentation booklet, because we weren't married and we were traveling together. So I just wanted to say that that really conditioned a lot of how I subsequently saw Spain and Sephardic life and so on. And when I learned about the Inquisition much later, I sort of immediately compared it to those days when you couldn't say anything about anything, you know, in Franco's Spain without it potentially being dangerous. I mean, my friends were arrested afterwards for speaking Valenciano Catalan with their school children. Yeah, sorry.
So Judith, you talking to you going back to Spain, you know, this idea that in the village they didn't know a lot about Jewish life, and then throughout the years you decided to do a project on crypto Jews, to do research on crypto Jews, and then I guess the moment where you did your research, and throughout the years also the perception, the touristic aspect of Jewish life in Portugal and in Spain changed. I have a photo here. This one Can you see?
You're not
here?
sharing. Okay, now you are.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
With your daughter. I assume that it's in Spain.
Yeah, this
William.
is Galicia actually, and I was just beginning. It was the first stage of my project, and the idea with a friend of ours, the one who was the rabbi in the picture of the medieval wedding, my friend Jose Ramon. He was really, really bright guy, and he did the first stages of my fieldwork in Portugal with me. He drove a car. He spoke Galician. He could handle Portuguese, and he actually said to me, well, why don't we set it up as a border project? And what we can do is compare songs on either side of the Spanish-Portuguese border and see if in the historically Jewish areas, anything stands out as different that we can maybe then identify with Jewish practice. He wasn't an ethnomusicologist, he's just really smart. So we were doing a lot of cross-border fieldwork at the time. By the way, no, there's nothing that can identify anything as an old crypto-Jewish melody or way of singing. Words, yes. Prayers, yes. Customs, yes. But not actual melodies, just to cut that one short. So this is in Galicia, in a village, and Concha, this lovely woman, just died a few years ago. And Tamar, very early on, said, Mama, I can videotape a lot better than you. Give me the video camera. You can deal with the audio stuff. But I take better pictures and I film better. So hand over the camera. So that's what she's doing here. She didn't ask, by the way. She simply told me. And Jessica, as a mother of a very brilliant young son, probably recognizes some of these patterns. You'll recognize more, Jessica. And Vanessa, as a mother of 3 brilliant sons, I'm sure recognizes this. So Concha told us she's playing pots and pans here and other domestic percussion. You can see her holding the little pan in her hand, and she was showing us how to do percussion on it. But what she also told us that day is she said, when I was young, I was so beautiful and I sang so beautifully. She still sang beautifully in her 70s. I sang so beautifully that the foreman, when we were working out in the fields, would tell me to stop, would pay me to stop singing because the young men would not work because they would only listen to me singing and look at me. And so I wouldn't work at all. The foreman would just pay me not to do anything and to stop singing.
That's nice. Yeah, so that's I know we have, we need to
But
give
the crypto-Jewish thing,
yeah, the crypto Jews. If so, that's how you came back actually after the field work on Judeo-Spanish song.
Well, I never stopped to work on Judeo-Spaniards, but sometime in the early 90s, somebody mentioned to me offhand, I mean, I knew that they were, crypto-Jews and so on, but someone mentioned offhand a woman in this town called Belmonte that nobody was talking about yet, who was doing anthropological work with them. And I said, oh, that sounds interesting. I wonder if there's any music around. So I designed that first project with Ramon, actually, and I got a really tiny grant. Basically, it paid him a little bit and it paid some costs. And we went to Belmonte. We went up to Trás-os-Montes in the northeast of Portugal. We made a list of all the villages and towns that were mentioned in Inquisition records. We went and interviewed Inquisition scholars in Madrid. We actually made whole lists of towns to go to and questions to ask, and bit by bit we just started doing this field work. And it was sheer luck. I mean, it was luck that I started doing the Sephardic field work really with the last generation of women in Montreal from Morocco who knew the ballads all the way through, who really knew a lot of these traditions firsthand. And it was sheer luck that we ended up in Portugal when the last of the old prayer women were still alive. And really they've all passed away now, and it's become very folklorized and Disneyfied and so on. So it was just good luck. But I'll say something else about field work. I don't have very much money. I'm a single parent. I never learned how to drive. I never had 2 incomes. The reason I'm saying this is that I've always traveled as a hippie. I've always just traveled with a backpack on my back. And with my daughter, I won't hitchhike, obviously. But I hitchhiked right up until she was born, and I've hitchhiked alone well into my 60s in Spain, by the way. And with her, I took her on buses and trains and whatever was around. And, we slept on people's couches and so on. And people in the villages, people in Sephardic communities in the cities didn't like that much. And they always saw me as a kind of hippie alien. But people in the villages really liked it, and they identified it. I didn't do it for that reason, obviously. If I had a car, I'd drive a car. When I have a friend with a car who will take me, or my daughter, in fact, who drives, I'm delighted. But I figured out bit by bit that they found that very non-threatening, that I would show up with a backpack in jeans and an old shirt and with a kid and a single mother. And, you know, I'd pay my way, obviously, but I had nothing extra. And a lot of these women, the crypto-Jewish women, would say in a really Jewish mother kind of way, but who's taking care of you? Who's making sure you're okay? Come in, have something to eat. When did you last have supper? And then they would give Tamar, she always says, all these awful things to eat. She said, I knew I had to be polite about those horrible beef sausages and, you know, that warm Coke and, you know, that bread that even my good teeth couldn't bite into. And I had to put up with all these women pinching my cheek and my chin with their bad breath because you were doing your field work with crypto Jews. Just to give you a realistic vision of that. So that also really influenced the field work, though. And I didn't plan it like that, but I think all the years of hitchhiking around as a kind of more or less hippie and, you know, just traveling and being with people, I don't do field work any differently. I don't like, I took all the courses, you know, and I took all those ethnomusicology 101 and fieldwork 101 and how to do it courses, and I basically ignored them.
Mm-hmm. Judith, I would like to talk about the concept of nostalgia because, you know, a lot of people or ethnomusicologists working on Jewish music, you know, especially klezmer or Judeo-Spanish, you know, this is Judeo-Spanish repertoire. The concept of nostalgia is often present, and also the idea of maybe being reluctant to popular interpretation or more pop style. And I would like to know, do you consider yourself a nostalgic?
I don't know, you asked me that before and I was trying to think about it. I mean, not really. I have a personal preference for traditional forms of music. I just like it better. But, you know, as an ethnomusicologist, you know, one of the first things you learn is, you know, it's not about what you like or what you think about what you value. It's about what people are doing and what it means in their lives and you know, what it means in all our lives and how to interpret it and so on. So I sort of have two separate hats. One is what I prefer as a person to listen to and to sing. And one is what I'm studying as an ethnomusicologist, which in many ways has almost nothing to do with it. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure about, I mean, nostalgic in the sense of, yeah, I miss those days, you know, when there were women who knew all these old songs and when it wasn't so folklorized and there weren't so many big, ugly buildings and so on. But do I miss not having cell phones? No. Do I miss not having easy access to lightweight video cameras? No. Do I miss carrying heavy stacks of cassettes and batteries and battery chargers and so on with me? No, I don't miss it in the least. You know that many of you probably saw the cartoon that circulated on Facebook in various languages, English, Portuguese, French, where you have sort of these exaggerated cavemen and they're saying, quick, hide all the electronic equipment, the ethnomusicologists or the anthropologists are coming. So, you know, it's kind of that.
I would like now to talk about your other project. So I decided to use this photo with Flori Jagoda. I assume it, or maybe it's not. Is it in DC where she, you know?
Yeah, it was, she lived in Virginia, just outside DC, in the DC area. This is the last time, I think it might be the last time I saw her. No,
So
I
is
saw
it
her
when-
once. I saw her once the year after. This is 2016. And I did see her once the following year before she, you know, really had more advanced dementia.
Yeah.
But I met Flori in 83. I met her the same year and with, in fact, remember the woman I talked about who was from Sarajevo and lived on a Mohawk reserve?
Mm-hmm.
So Flori came to Montreal in 83 as part of the Festival Sefarad, one of the early Festival Sefarad, and Geroneldo was asked to open for her. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we were talking before the show went on and doing sound check and so on and so forth, and she said to me, well, can you sing harmonies? And I said, yeah. And she said, good, I'm going to teach you a couple of harmonies to 2 songs and you'll come up on stage and sing them with me. And she thought incorrectly that I already knew these songs because everybody knew them. And actually my whole life, I've mostly sung songs that not everybody knows. So one was Adio Querida, which I think I'd heard, but I'd kind of written out of my memory because I didn't like it because it's so saccharine and sentimental and stuff and Western sounding. And the other was her own song, Ocho Candelicas, which Flori laughed about this her whole life, which I never liked. It's like one of my most unfavorite songs. But I wasn't going to say that, and I'd never heard it anyway. So she sang them to me, and she taught me the harmony and thirds. And she said, right, well, now you're coming up on stage and singing them with me.
Mhm.
And, after there was a reception, and at the reception, I heard her speaking what we then said was Serbo-Croatian with this beautiful older lady. And I went up to them, and in my, very bad, I call it my pigeon pan Slavic, Michael, my really terrible pigeon pan Slavic, I said, "Oh, hi, how are you?" And I also sort of speak this language, and where are you from? And she said, "Well, I'm from Sarajevo." And I said, "You are? Can I come interview you? Can I ask you about songs?" And, I'm writing my thesis on Ladino songs, blah, blah, blah. And she said, "Yeah, sure. Here's my address." And she wrote it out for me. And I said, but it says Kanawake. And she said, "That's because I live in Kanawake." I said, "You live in Kanawake?" I mean, when I was a little kid, my Uncle Mo and my Uncle Lou would drive us out to what we then called Cognawaga to see who we then called the Indians dancing. So what do you mean a Bosnian Sephardic woman is living in Kanawake? She said, "Well, come out and I'll tell you why." And so I got a girlfriend who had a car, Ukrainian belly dance teacher friend, come to think of it, to drive me out to Kanawake. And she started to tell me her story. And halfway through, I said, "Wait a second, I know who you are. You're Rebecca West's Bulbul from Black Lamb and Grey Falcon, from that book by Rebecca West." And she actually burst into tears and she said, "How did you know that?" And I said, "Well, you couldn't be anybody else." So I met Nina through Flori, and Flori and I stayed friends right up until her death. I sang on the Zoom memorial concert afterwards. And I don't know, I just adored her. She's just one of the people I didn't have complicated feelings about, one of the few people in the world I have no complicated feelings about whatsoever. I just adored her. We disagreed lots. I mean, Flori, when she put out her last CD, she had put out one before that together with Ramon Tassat, this absolutely lovely person whom you might know near DC, Jessica, a cantor who did his thesis on Moroccan liturgical singing. And she said, I had dinner at her house because I was just starting to work on the Alan Lomax project at the time. And she said, "I'm going to give you our new CD with Ramon. And if you tell me you like every single song on it, I'll know you're not my friend anymore and you're not being honest." That was Flori. Flori was amazing.
So I decided to have this photo because actually you came to DC for the Lomax project. You obtained the prestigious Library of Congress Fellowship. So is anything that you want to tell us about, diving into the archives at the Library of Congress on Lomax? Anything, why you decided to do this project? What was, I know there's
Well, I mean, that was sort of connected to, it was connected in what happened was I was in Galicia. I was actually in Rivadavia with Jose Ramon, the one, and his now husband, and Marcos, the ones you saw in that fake medieval wedding picture. So I was there with them, and one of the people who was there was chatting with me, and oh yeah, I know, I was documenting the fake medieval festivals. I was doing the Sephardic music in the so-called medieval festivals of Spain. And he said, a long time ago, this ethnomusicologist from Britain, he got it mixed up because Lomax was living in England when he went to Spain. I don't remember his name, he said, but he made recordings here in Rivadavia. Can you find them for us? And I said, well, I'll try. And I asked around, and I realized eventually that he was talking about Alan Lomax, who had been living in England. And so he recorded people and sent them money from the BBC, and they associated with England. And so I said, oh yeah, you want those recordings? I'll get them. So next time I was in New York, I went to the Lomax archive before it had moved to the Library of Congress. And, I emailed ahead of time, and I went in, and the first thing Anna Lomax Wood, the wonderful, beautiful, brilliant Anna Lomax Wood, said to me was, well, before we do anything, and before I give you headphones and tell our sound technician to give you whatever you want to listen to, before I do that, it's almost lunchtime. Do you prefer Greek food, Cuban food, Caribbean food? What shall I order? That was Anna, and she's not even a Jewish mother. And then I put on the headphones and I started listening, and I started saying things like, oh, they still sing that in this village in Extremadura. Oh, they still sing this style in Ibiza. Oh, listen to that. I think that's the mother of this woman that I recorded last year in such and such. And Anna was listening to all this, and finally she said, well, wait a second. We need someone to edit the Spanish recordings. Can you do it? And I said, only if I can have a co-editor from each region of Spain to edit that CD with me.
Mm.
So that's how we did it. And that's how I became involved in it. And then I became involved, which I'm still doing, hoping to finish it up this month or next month, actually, edit his diary, but it's not as simple as editing his diary. That would be easy. I would have done that a long time ago. It's editing his diary together with my fieldwork in a lot of the same places over the years. But because I never did it as a systematic restudy, I did it really patchwork. If I was in Spain to do something else, I would take 2 weeks and go to Ibiza, or take 2 weeks and go to Extremadura, or take 2 weeks and go here or go there and find some of the people that he'd recorded, or their children or their neighbors. And, you know, so it's a real kind of patchwork. So I've been working on that, and we stopped putting out the CDs in 2006 because Rounder Records fulfilled their contract and basically fell apart after that. And then everything went online and so on, but there's still all the liner notes, which colleagues of mine have prepared and, you know, aren't together with the online recordings yet. And there's the diaries, which have an incredible wealth of information. And what's interesting is people associate me so much with Sephardic music that when I started working with the Lomax collection, people would say, oh, I didn't know Lomax recorded Jewish music. And I'd say, he didn't. And they'd say, so why are you working on it? As if I had nothing else that I could possibly do but, you know, music related to Jewish life. He did, and I gave a paper on this at the World Congress of Jewish Studies at the last one. He did correspond as part of his Columbia Library of Folk and, quote, primitive music at the time. He corresponded with Edith Gerson-Kiwi, who was, of course, pioneering ethnomusicologist of Israel. And she sent him reel-to-reel tapes for his collection. And there's not much correspondence. It's just 2 or 3 letters, but they're hilarious because we don't have his letters to her. But her letters to him keep saying, Dear Mr. Lomax, I hope that these tapes are more suitable for your purposes than the ones you commented on before. But let me explain to you something. You say you don't want liturgical music. In Israel and in Judaism, liturgical music is part of folk music. Naomi is laughing. She wrote to him, and they were about the same age. And I think she was afraid that he was seeing her as a young woman who really shouldn't be an ethnomusicologist. But he didn't think that way. Actually, he didn't really care what you were as long as your brain worked. And so that's really interesting. And also Larea Palacin, the Spanish folklorist, a musicologist whom Lomax consulted a lot about Spanish folk music, gave him his first publication of Moroccan Sephardic ballads. And Lomax sent it to Edith Gerson-Kiwi as thank you for sending him all those tapes and being so patient. So there's actually a letter where she says, Dear Mr. Lomax, I can't thank you enough, you know, for sending me this book whose existence I didn't know of. So there's a really, you know, intriguing little connection there.
Because we didn't talk about your teaching, your recordings. I just wanted to, you know, for those of you who do not know, so this is 3 different albums, and we didn't have the time to talk.
And there's a 4th one that I did before these with Radio Canada with my daughter, but it's okay.
Yes.
Dans mon chemin, along the road.
I don't have it here, but I would like to ask you a last question, and then, you know, taking 10 minutes for the audience if they have specific questions. So this is a photo. I mean, I just wanted to talk about transmission and future. I really like this photo where I guess you were performing with Tamar.
It was actually a medieval concert, yeah.
And because there's a lot about transmission here. I mean, from what I know, in terms of what you transmitted to Tamar, in terms of music, in terms of Spain, and then, you know, word music, even if I hate this term, but anyway. How do you see, Judith, the future of, more specifically, because we discuss a lot about Judeo-Spanish music, how do you see the future of the repertoire, and the way also we as ethnomusicologists will look at this repertoire in the future?
It's so hard to say. I mean, there's so many different things to say. And since Michael is here, I'm going to say something I say often. It's one thing if you make changes to a tradition from a really deep knowledge of that tradition. And I'm mentioning Michael because he's one of the people who's done that. If you want Michael to be a Badchan and do something super traditional and go out there, or ask Zev Feldman, my wonderful, brilliant, fantastic friend and hand percussion teacher from the 70s. If you ask them or any number of really fine musicians to go out there and sing and or play in a really traditional style, they can. And when they innovate, when Josh Dolgan, when Ilya Schneeves, when they innovate and they do new things, and Michael Vinograd, it's based on a really solid knowledge of old stuff. And to me, they can get as crazy as they want because they sort of know where it's coming from, and they have this little thing somewhere. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but I get the impression that you guys have this sort of little thing somewhere that says this line isn't crossed. It's still klezmer, it's still Yiddish, it's still Jewish, it's still something, no matter how outlandish it sounds, no matter how far away it is, because you know where it's coming from. Whereas what I see a lot in Sephardic music is people making all kinds of changes without anything resembling this base. They often don't know the language. They've never heard any traditional, even recordings, never mind firsthand. They haven't even heard them secondhand. And not only that, they don't care, which is the really crucial thing. They say things like, well, this is how I see it. I'm just being creative. I'm expressing myself. Or I have Vanessa here, from the Sephardic side. And Vanessa, again, correct me if I'm wrong. You've said before, look, I'm a trained singer. I'm trained in opera. I'm trained in all kinds of things. I'm not going to sound like a woman sounded in Alksar Kivir in 1940 singing a ballad. I know how she sounded. But I'm not going to sound like that myself. And to me, this kind of honesty and this kind of, being based in something means that you can make changes from, like, you're coming from an honest place. And in a way, it's the way changes have been made in music forever. Otherwise, we'd still be singing the way we were singing, in biblical times, or nothing would have changed since the Middle Ages or the Renaissance. Things change because people change. But when you come in from outside and you jump in and you impose things and you say, well, it's just me being creative, and I don't need to know about the tradition. It bothers me as a person, as an ethnomusicologist. I just say, oh, well, that's what's happening right now. I just heard about somebody who, wrote that she was walking around in Fez years ago and she heard a bunch of women singing Ladino songs as a group on the streets of Fez. Well, that's simply not possible unless they happen to be a performance group at the festival and they were singing one of their festival songs on the street. It's just not historically or ethnographically or in any way possible. And when somebody says this kind of thing and is teaching and is performing, that really bothers me a lot, simply because it's misrepresentation. But change, particularly change based on people's knowledge of the tradition, is what happens all the time. I might personally like it or not like it, and I often don't like it, but it's irrelevant whether I personally like it or don't like it. And in terms of my daughter, what's interesting is obviously she grew up with me. She came to all the conferences because I was a single mother and I just kind of dragged her everywhere. And she listened to a lot more than she let on, which I know because she wrote her high school international French baccalaureate essay. I said, what are you going to write it on? And she said, I'll just do it on something I know well already. I'm busy. I'm playing volleyball. I'm on the sports team. I'm, doing flamenco. I'm teaching swimming. I'll just do it on something I already know well. I said, what's that? And she said, just like any high school student in Canada, she said, oh, well, the difference between the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions. She'd come to all these conferences. She'd done all this field work with me. She'd, absorbed a lot more from conversations than she let on. And she wrote a very, very good high school leaving essay on the difference between the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions. And I had no input. She had my library. She could read in Portuguese. She could read in Spanish. She could read in French. I didn't do a thing. I didn't even read it over before she sent it in. But she's also a highly trained flamenco singer and dancer. And all her life, she's heard me say, Sephardic music is not flamenco. It's not medieval and it's not flamenco. And she knows all about it. She went to Flamenco Academy in Seville and so on. So what does she do? She integrates Ladino songs with flamenco and Balkan songs with flamenco. And when I'm in the audience, she gives me an evil look that makes her look, instead of a mature woman in her 30s, which she is, it makes her look like Jessica's little kid and Vanessa's little kids when they're giving evil little kids, smart evil little kids looks. And see, Mummy? I'm going to mix flamenco with Ladino songs no matter what you say. So there. But again, like the people I was mentioning, if someone calls upon her to sing a Sephardic ballad in traditional style, or a flamenco palo in super traditional style, or an English Scots border ballad in traditional style, or a French Canadian song that she's growing up hearing me sing, you know, playing spoons in the traditional way, or any of those things, she can do it. She can do it at the drop of the hat, and she will do it, and she does do it. And she's done acoustic sets with Sephardic songs mixed with flamenco, mixed with a bit of belly dance. But if she's going to sing a paraliturgical song, she's respectful to it because she also grew up with Soli Levi. And although I'm not myself observant or religious, she grew up with that respect that, you know, there are things you do and things you don't do. So in terms of transmission, I actually never taught her a song. No, it's not true. Once she said, I like that Italian song with two parts. That's a version of a Sephardic ballad. We were sitting in the subway and she said, sing me that other part. And she was 8. So I remember that. And I think twice for our CDs, I had to teach her a song quickly because we were recording in the studio 2 days later. Other than that, she just absorbed them. Sometimes she sings complex melodies back to me that I never knew she paid any attention to, ornament for ornament. And that's the traditional way people learn, you know, really by osmosis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Judith. I mean, I don't know in terms of time, Phil, if we can give sometimes, I'm sure, for hopefully a little bit to the audience.
Yeah, we have up to half an hour more. So,
wonderful. So I just
So you can do a number of things. You can ask straight questions. You can ask Jessica questions because, you know, I also sort of wanted to talk a little bit about Jessica's work. Or you can go back to some of the photos that I went through really quickly and ask a question about that. And I will try and check the chat at the same time as well.
And I just wanted to say something because it's a kind of a little anecdote. I don't know if you remember, Judith, when we were in Kazakhstan, we had a very interesting experience at the synagogue over there. And or not only at the synagogue, but it was a very interesting journey in Kazakhstan. And I remember there was so many moments I was like so upset. And you told me, Jessica, think about it. If there is something wrong, just think it's fieldwork. It's fieldwork. It's fieldwork. And anytime, you know, I'm traveling and there is a kind of a moment where I'm like, okay, it's fieldwork. And then, you know, you feel a little bit better after all. Anyway. So
Can you bring things together with a bit of music? So you're talking about the music, you're talking about the different ethnicities and where you've gone and this, that, and the other. But to put it all together, to bring it all together, I think you should play something to show what you've been talking about and give examples, because that would then gel everything. That's just my opinion. But,
well, I sang a couple of snatches. I mean, I can't, you know, do any one thing that brings it all together, but you can ask specific, you know, questions.
No, it's just a thought, because you've gone from Salonika to Eastern Europe to Morocco. You've done a world journey mentioning different types of ethnicity and the music and the culture and everything and the instruments and the various different people that you've come across, but you've painted a wonderful picture. And I just like to feel as though that is completed with something that shows these things. It's just my opinion. It just will, you know,
sure.
complete something.
There's an awful lot of things, so ask me about one of them. Oh, sorry, Cecil, I didn't see you. How are you? Thanks for coming. Hi, Judith. All these people I absolutely miss so much. Yeah, okay. It is great to see you on the screen, but I want to give you a hug, all of you.
No problem.
I don't know, is there one specifically? Sometimes I tell my students if I'm teaching from my room on Zoom, I just say, you know, point to something and ask about it. And I'll play it or tell you about it.
Judith?
Yeah?
How about the Moroccan song about the Jew who's visiting one rabbi's tomb or monument after another?
What, you want me to sing that in front of Vanessa? I'm not going to sing that in front of you. So this is a Moroccan henna-painted drum that I got actually in Larache. It's not made in Larache, but there was a guy who had a little store where he sold cheap jewelry and drums and souvenirs and all kinds of things. And I got a couple of fabulous drums from him for like nothing, like the equivalent of $5 or $6. So it's a song, I actually didn't learn it from Geroneldo. We used to sing it with Geroneldo, but where did I learn it? I learned it, did I learn it from? I didn't even learn it in fieldwork. I think I learned it when we went to Israel, invited by Mabat, by that Moroccan, association, Mabat in '83. And then I think I learned it from someone else. But what the song Susan is talking about is a song about the Hilula, which Vanessa can tell you an awful lot more about than I can. But basically, it's a custom that's shared in certain countries by both Muslims and Jews. And it's the visit to the grave or the tomb of a venerated, in the case of Jews, usually a rabbi. In one case in Morocco, it's a woman. And in the case of Muslims, to the tomb of saints. And there's a song in Morocco that is the one that Susan asked about. And it says, "Where are you going, Yitzhak?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to town X to pray at the tomb of Rabbi so-and-so." And it just goes on like that. And then at the very end, I can't remember who sang me this last verse, but at the very end in one of the versions, he says, "Make my bed. And make my bed. I'm tired and I want to lie down." And he's clearly talking to his wife, but it just goes. ¿A dónde vais, señor Yitzhak? Que mos vamos para Wezan, para zorear, Arbi Amran Ben Diwan. Su nembración, que nos sirva de bendición. And it goes on like that. And actually, in Morocco in 2013, this man from Larache, Muslim man from Larache, Mohammed, found me on the internet, and he wrote me out of the blue, right around now in January 2013. He wrote me in Spanish and said, "I want you to come to Larache and bring back some of the songs of the Jewish women who used to live here." And I sort of went, "What? Like, is this one of these, Nigerian banker schemes or something?" And I ended up going, and he set up a thing where with the women who were singing in a brand new young women's Muslim religious or paraliturgical song group, I don't know what to call it, we did a concert together I did the Jewish songs from Larache, her group did Muslim songs, and in between I taught them a bunch of wedding songs and this song. And the reason for this song was that they knew the rhythm, they knew the idea. And even though I already knew which rabbi was associated with which town from Soli Levi, I went to the Hajj of Larache, who is also a tailor, and everybody sees him all the time because he sits there sewing and getting his beautiful jalabas ready, and he wears a different one 3 times a day as sort of advertising, and he helps poor people pay for their weddings and so on. Just a totally lovely man. And I went to him and said, "Can you tell me which rabbi was associated with here in Larache and which rabbi was associated with Aksar Kibir and which one with Arzila?" And he just reeled them all off. And there hadn't been a Jew living there in 20 years, just to give you an idea. And so we did that song together in the last Catholic church of Larache. And Andrea Zulay was there, but I can also say that there were older people in the audience who were crying. They said, "This really reminds us of that time." And they weren't talking about the mythical medieval Spanish so-called convivencia where everybody presumably got along really well, except when they were killing each other off and so on. They were talking about real times, and it was really quite beautiful. And one of the things people said to me a lot in Morocco when I started asking about Jewish life and Jewish memories were really practical things. They would say when the Jews lived here, things ran better. They were more organized. In Tetuan, I remember them saying the streets were cleaner, and things like that. Like they didn't say, "Oh, we all loved each other and we all got along and we all thought we were wonderful and we connected on all kinds of spiritual levels that you can intuit in our songs," and so on and so forth. No, I never heard that once. But I heard a lot of really practical, I really miss it when they were here. Things worked better. We got along. It was okay. It was cool. And so there's that song. There's the viol is a medieval instrument. I keep talking about the viol. I used it very, very little in Sephardic music because I didn't want to reinforce the medieval myth, but I do use it for occasional old ballads. I use it a lot more for both medieval music and French Canadian songs and that kind of thing, where it works really well because it's got like a drone. I don't know if it's in tune. I just had it restrung. This is actually it's not, from 78, I bought it in 1978 from the maker. I don't know if I'm going to start tuning. Yeah, I don't know if I want to start spending time tuning it now because there's not any fine tuning. But basically, is there a bow? There must be a bow somewhere. What did I do with the bow? I just saw the bow. Maybe it's down. Okay, I'll look for it in a minute. Basically, because it's got a really flat ridge and sort of double strings, it's really easy to play traditional songs that, oh, here it is. Traditional songs that have that kind of, folky drone on the bottom. Except it's completely out of tune and I want to inflict this. So yeah, I'm out of practice. When I do a lot of live concerts, I'm really used to talking to the audience while you tune your instrument. You know that one, Michael, where you have your set list written on the front of your guitar so you can sort of peer at it and you're looking at your set list and tuning your guitar and doing your patter with the audience while you're at it. But it's so different on Zoom because you see yourself doing it and then you get really distracted and it's kind of, really, really annoying. I don't know what to say. Sorry, it's not staying in tune. I'm going to skip it. Dessus le pont de Nantes, dessus le pont de Nantes. It's actually a chanson au refrain, à répondre, so you should repeat it after me. You can do it, Jessica. Because we're not singing together. You can just repeat it. Dessus le pont de Nantes, là, dessus le pont de Nantes. Il y a un coq qui chante la nuit et le jour. Vive la jeunesse qui entretient l'amour. Vive la jeunesse qui entretient l'amour. Il y a un coq qui chante là, il y a un coq qui chante. On sait ce qu'il demande la nuit et le jour. Vive la jeunesse qui entretient l'amour. Vive la jeunesse qui entretient l'amour. And so on. But it would take a long time. I'd have to go through everything. I'd have to start by playing you the Handel sonata I was playing on the rooftop in Sarajevo,
People, Judith, were asking a lot, and I saw in the chat that they were wanting to listen to music and they wanted to understand the different genre from the different repertoire that you looked at. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Sorry, I'm not reading the chat. Let me just see.
No, that's what I'm trying to do. So it's interesting.
I have a question, Judith.
I don't know what they commented about American. Well, I'm Canadian, but campfire songs. They have more reference than one would think. The campfire songs that we sang were actually mostly civil rights movement songs.
No, I'm not. I'll just jump in there. I meant in the context of a synagogue and liturgical music. I was making that particular.
Well, there's
statement.
a lot of.
I should have said Jewish American in shul or whatever. But if I wanted to jump in here because, you are like a walking encyclopedia. You could go on for 20 hours. You could just have you remind me of guys.
Marsha. I've been at Zooms where I've learned so much from you, and then it's the end of the Zoom.
But the point is that you remind me of the guys who were standing up there talking incessantly for the filibuster in Congress. It was just amazing.
Oops, sorry.
And you'll see it when you review the tape. But I think I would love, I don't know how everybody else feels, but I would love to have a second session, and you might have to do a little work because it's not, just ad hoc coming out, from the head of Zeus. I would love
Yes, it is. I just didn't tell you.
to situate everything that you've said today within the context of different geographies, because you're a world traveler, you've been to all these places, and clearly there are differentiations that from a musical analytical perspective that we really haven't experienced today. But this was like an amazing sort of first step background, introduction, if you will, for the people who are very knowledgeable on this Zoom, who are experts in Sephardic music and trained in ethnomusicology and field research and all of that, it's, it's second nature. They just like get right into it. But for people who are more historical musicologists or cantors, so their performance art, if you will, is within the framework, for the most part, professionally at least, of the synagogue. I think it would be fascinating, because I feel like, we're just on the cusp now. You've given us so much, but I want to have it situated geographically and, contextually. So thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Thank you for
Just
that.
an idea.
I've actually given quite a few online talks about, specifically about Ladino songs and their different genres and the context in which they're used, and on crypto Jews and so on. I can do that, and I've done it often. And in terms of the synagogue, Vanessa has done a lot of work on contrafactum, and Michael knows, quite a lot of you know a lot about contrafactum in the Ashkenazi world, but in the Sephardic world, both I and Vanessa and our colleagues Edwin Sarusi and Shoshana Vaishachak and others have done a lot of work on contrafactum and what happens to really secular songs when they're lifted into the synagogue, and and how their melodies get adapted, and how the tone of voice and the Sali Levi, que descanse, may he rest in peace. Sali Levi was a fount of information about that, because not only did he know all the songs, he talked about how they were used and how they changed. And actually I have, Vanessa, that bit in my dissertation when I talk about the tune for Pescado Frito and Lechado Di and Hermana Simcha, and how Sali would actually change the way he sang it. So when it was just a sort of little, fun, semi-erotic song, Pescado Frito, vende Jacob, ande lo frío en la sartén de mazal, that kind of thing. And then it would be a little bit more serious when you were talking about getting ready for Pesach. Hermana Simcha, Pesach ya vino, amasai no Pascua, y sakai el vino. But then when it was for Lechado Di, it was slowed down, and it was not, sad, but more solemn. You're welcoming the Sabbath bride. It's not sad, but it's more solemn. It's Lechado Di likrat kala pene Shabbat nekabela shamor. And then he even sang it for Yit Gadal. And then it got slower and more respectful and so on. So there's all kinds of things like that. And I've, done a little bit of work on that, but I think Vanessa is the one to talk about in terms at least of especially Moroccan Sephardic songs, like a really deep way of going into it. And I want to introduce you, because I didn't see her until now, to Veronica, Vera. I actually met her through my work on Buena Sarfati Garfinkel's memoirs, because you typed them up, right? And you knew her before I knew her. And then I met you subsequently. And I keep forgetting that that's our connection, because once I met you, I just kind of liked you. And so you just became a friend. And when I go back to Montreal, pre-pandemic, if we could get together, we got together. So I just wanted to introduce you, say hi.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, we did get, I think it's Buena's son who put us together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, many years ago.
Eli Garfinkel.
Yeah.
And another person who's done some interesting contrafacts, but not in Sephardic music, of course, is Rachel. It's so funny, because on Zoom, I can stare right at somebody, but you don't know that I'm staring right at you, right? And remember when you sent me your contrafact to sacred harp stuff for Purim? Because I said I wanted to do more sacred harp songs with my students, but I was uneasy with all the Christian imagery. And you said, oh, well, I just happen to have a couple of sacred harp songs that I wrote that can be sung in a Jewish context. And that's what we've always done, right? We've, not only Jews, but since we're talking about Jewish music, since we know about it, since the Psalms, we've adapted lachan, we've adapted a melody, we've adapted a way of doing music from the culture that we're living in, and used elements of it in ways that we needed for whatever it was we were doing, whether it was light or serious or secular or religious. And, secular religious isn't really that either. It's not like there's a big break in between the two and everything on this side is secular and everything on this side is religious. It doesn't really work like that, but it's convenient.
No, actually, Judith, that brought up a question for me. When you were talking about your work at the Lomax archives, and you talked about this letter that he had written to Edith, I want folk music and not liturgical music. I mean, I keep forgetting that Lomax worked on Spanish music at all because I know him mostly from this shape note context. Like, he worked with shape note singers, and he must have known that music that really straddles that folk and religious divide. And I'm wondering if you said you'd been working with his diaries. Did you ever figure out where it was that he managed to square that circle in his mind?
He didn't go into churches at all in Spain, really. I mean, he recorded a church organist once, and he noted if something was, a Christmas folk song or something like that. But he was really in Spain. He was 35 at the time, something like that. And he was really interested. He also ignored everything that was formal. So in the women of the Sección Femenina, the women's branch of the Franco Phalanx, when they would say, well, we have this choir that you can record, or we have this, he'd sort of go, no thanks. So he was really, really focused on village music and even on subversive, quietly subversive. So if it was a song about, a ballad about monks, jumping into the nun's garden or something like that, like the equivalent of Paipero, Vanessa, he would focus on that. He didn't talk about that much.
Huh. That would probably explain why he liked shape note singing so much.
When did he, like, the only recording I can think of that I use all the time of his in shape note is a bit later, no? A bit later in the 50s, like after he went back to the States?
Yeah, it was the United Convention. I think it was the 1959 United Convention, but I think he hung around shape note circles for a long time after that. When he died, a lot of singers put him on their memorial list. So they considered him part of the community.
But Spain was before he went back to the States from all those years in England and France and Italy.
So he probably calmed down a bit by the time he got to Alabama.
I'm not sure calm down is a phrase one can ever use in relation to Alan Lomax, but yeah, I guess in some ways. Michael, you're uncharacteristically
relationship
silent.
to Alabama very much either.
Okay, I've never known Michael to be silent for this long, especially when his eyes and eyebrows are active. Did you have anything you wanted to ask or say, Michael?
I'm speaking in gestural language here. I did, but that thing, like when I was 12, I discovered the meaning of life, but forgot to write it down.
Right.
This is it's your time. Keep going. I'll look back through things, and thank you for I feel like I just came as as a camper here, so thank you for referring to me so much.
Well, it's hard not to, I remember the day that I brought one of my Spanish colleagues with me to your house in Manhattan, and you just launched into absolutely flawless Spanish, and she was really blown away. Remember that when Marusha and I went to visit you? I hadn't even realized what on top of it all, like not only Polish and Russian and this and the Yiddish, and on top of it all, he speaks really good Spanish. Shouldn't be allowed.
L.A.
Has Benny gone? Benny Meissner? He wrote a really nice note. I don't see him. Any other questions, comments, any pictures you want to see again or ask questions about?
Judith, I have a question.
Yeah.
And maybe you can just send this to me, in an email or something, but I'm wondering if you talked about when you were talking about that the music from Sephardic music doesn't go back to the Middle Ages, and you recognize that it wasn't medieval music and so on. Have you gotten an article or something that defines some of these characteristics that you were identifying, that you recognize, you said, as Balkan elements rather than medieval elements and so on? Have you got an article about that would lay a lot of that out?
I don't. That's such an interesting question. As you were hi Judy. I'm sorry, I should have said hi to you properly before.
Okay.
I don't actually. Do you, Vanessa, or does Edwin? I mean, Edwin and I both have articles about medieval music and about the role of Jews in music in medieval Iberia and so on. But in terms of actual musical characteristics, I mean, the Balkans is easy, and Shoshana has a couple of articles on contrafactive Balkan and Sephardic songs. I mean, that one's easy. You just sort of go, oh, I know that tune. That rhythm is, it's in 9. It's actually one really funny thing that happens in Sephardic contrafact in the Balkans is the words get tortured. So you have a song, for example, I don't know what the original song was to this tune, but it's in 9. And it's like 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. Okay, it's like Karşılama in Turkey and Devetorka. But they take this song, Estas casas, these houses, tan hermosas, so beautiful, para que bailan las damas, so the ladies and the young girls dance. But the rhythm of the words, the natural rhythm of the words is Estas casas tan hermosas, nothing to do with 9/8, which is 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. So when you sing it, this is what happens to Estas casas tan hermosas. Estas casas tan hermosas, estas casas tan hermosas, para que bailen las novias. So it's exactly the opposite. Instead of saying estas casas tan hermosas, you're saying estas casas tan hermosas. But just when I thought that was, a sort of specific Procrustean bed for, for innocent Sephardic songs, and that they were just torturing the Spanish, then I started doing field work in Spain and seeing that there are cases where exactly the same thing happens among people who only know Spanish and only sing in Spanish. So you'll get something like, this is a mortar and pestle, an almirez. Sorry, I'm really hoarse today. I think it's too dry in the house because the heating. Una rosa entró en la iglesia, una rosa entró en la iglesia, toda llena de rocío, entra libre y salió presa, casada con su marido, una rosa entró en la iglesia. So it's exactly the same thing. You would say, una rosa entró en la iglesia, but you're singing, una rosa entró en la iglesia, casada con su marido, instead of casada con su marido. So it's not only because it's been transposed from Spanish to a Balkan Slavic language setting. There's no earthly reason in Spain to do that except for fun, as far as I can see. I don't think the melody existed before the words, and I don't think it was a question of a contrafactum. And it shows up in French Canadian singing, it shows up in Spanish singing, it shows up in some Sephardic ballads, not from the Balkans. So my initial thought when I first heard that Estas Casas from Shoshana Weiss collection many years ago when I was beginning my field work, my initial assumption was that was because it was a Hispanic or a Romance language moved over to a tune that was meant for a Slavic language. Kind of went to pieces when I started hearing this kind of thing happening within the culture itself.
Yeah,
Was
it's
the language, the Hebrew language used in synagogues, or was the national language of the people used? Did they use Spanish, or did they use Portuguese, or did they Greek instead of the Hebrew, because the Hebrew might not have been known as well, or the language problem because of the hidden crypto Jews, so they reverted to their own languages.
The crypto Jews is a whole other story. I wouldn't mix them into this mix because they didn't do anything in Hebrew at all. Like, they haven't for many centuries, and they don't have services anyway because they couldn't.
Yeah, but then did the Salonika Jews have their services in Hebrew, or was
services were always in Hebrew, what we call paraliturgical, like paramedics, who run ambulances.
Yeah.
Who have medical knowledge, but they're not doctors. Paraliturgical music is usually either in the vernacular or it's in a mixture of Hebrew and the vernacular. And sometimes, especially if it's women singing, the Hebrew is pronounced in a very local way. So in Morocco, instead of saying Rosh Hashanah, you'll hear women saying Rosanna, almost as if it were a girl's name, like Rosanna. Para Rosana, for Rosh Hashanah. But when it's actual services, correct me if I'm wrong, Vanessa, I've never heard of Sephardic actual services being held in anything but Hebrew. The pronunciation of the Hebrew might vary depending on whether you're in Morocco or you're in Greece or you're in Turkey or you're in, the only culture that I know of that didn't use Hebrew until they made Aliyah to Israel were the Ethiopian Jews who use Ge'ez. But that's a whole different story. Everyone else, to my knowledge, used Hebrew, even if they didn't speak it. You know, my grandfather didn't speak Hebrew, but he certainly did the entire Haggadah in Hebrew very fast and very fluently, and never missed a word. But you get a lot of paraliturgical stuff. So, for example, in Morocco, you get this song that's sung at both Simchat Torah and Shavuot, or any other time you feel like singing it, and you get this mixture of words. So you'll get esta es la let's have a more mixed verse. Betupimu bimcholot con alegre placeres salgan hombres y mujeres diciendo las zemirot la Adon haniflaot que mi harpa nofia Señor venga el Mashiach sepamos Señor had ana Hi Torah lanu nitana. So they're not always as macaronic as that, but you often get that kind of thing in paraliturgical songs, and you get it less in that same wedding song, or in another wedding song from the same area, also in 9, you get words like buriquitas, which is obviously the Spanish diminutive of burek, but you also get minyan, dos or 10 minyanim de gente, 10 minyans of people, so 100 men, right? Ay, qué buena que fue la hora que vos alcancí con 10 minyanim de gente kiddushin vos di. So 10 minyanim de gente kiddushin vos di, you know. Yo pasé por la vuestra puerta, horas de Arvit, horas de Arvit. So
did they
Hebrew
did they
words,
rely
but
on
those are not
yeah.
liturgy. When they're doing liturgy, when they're actually singing the service or chanting the service, it's in Hebrew.
But who handed it down? Was it from family to family, from generation to generation, or was it
basically?
Yeah.
Yeah, mostly. I mean, there's always Miss Senora Pimienta, who sang me a lot of ballads in Montreal. She was highly educated on her own, mostly self-educated. She'd done the Alliance Israelite schools, but she also read a lot. She had whole books of Lope de Vega. And I remember she used to say to me things like, oh, this ballad shows up in a play by Lope de Vega. So who knows whether he, this Spanish author took a ballad that was common and inserted it, or he made a couple of things up and then it became popular, which also happens, like the Playford party dances, that kind of thing.
Have you gone into any of the Indian Jewish music? Or
only as an amateur? I don't really like working with cultures that I don't speak all the languages involved. So unless I spoke Marathi, if I were working with the Bnei Israel of the Mumbai area, I'd want to speak Marathi, I'd want to speak Urdu, I'd want to speak Hindi, and I don't. So I've done peripheral work with them. I've recorded them, I've interviewed them. There's a community here in Toronto that's quite active. There's about maybe 700 of them, and I've been interviewing them off and on since the early 1990s, but I leave that to specialists who know a lot about music of that part of India, who know the languages and so on. I mean, it's like people saying, oh, do you also play the sitar? Well, no, I have
No, because it's another sort of Sephardi type. I mean, it's a different, again, a customs.
I'm not using Sephardic in the pan-Sephardic sense.
But
I'm using Sephardic in the strict from Sepharad
right.
sense. Now, there were Jews who went to India from Sepharad, there were, but they got sort of subsumed pretty quickly into the group there. So I really am only talking about Sephardic in that mi Sepharad, from Sepharad sense.
Because in London, the Indian Jews integrated with the Persian community, basically.
I know, but that's a whole other story. I mean, those are whole other cultures.
Yeah.
So I've done that peripherally because, of course, Jewish musics of any sort interest me, and I like to know at least something about each one of them, about Jews from India and Jews from Uzbekistan and so on. But there's a limit to what you can specialize in, unless you're Edwin Sarusi, and then you can sort of be good at everything. But that's just Edwin.
You're not doing too bad yourself, Judith. You're not doing too bad.
Well, I mean, as I get older, I try and realize what it is I don't know, and that sort of keeps getting longer and longer. I sort of liked it better when I was younger and thought I knew things.
Judith, I do have one question. Which,
oh no, I bet I can't even answer it.
No, it's skipping back to. I hope you will be able to answer it. It's going way back to the beginning. What were your father and Solly playing on the main when they were playing banjo and fiddle?
So I only learned this not very long ago from their youngest sister, my Auntie Evie, who died at 99 about 6 or 7 years ago. And I didn't know this until then. They had a swing band. My father, Judith Cohen's father, had a swing band in Montreal, and he earned his way through university from 1928 to 1932 playing in the swing band. And if I had known this before, I mean, this is long before he'd even met my mother. He died when I was 5, so I have only very vague memories of him playing the banjo and singing things like California, Here I Come. I do remember that. And Bye Bye Blackbird, stuff like that. But if I'd known, I would have looked for the men in the band with him, because he was born in 1911 or 1912, and they're all long gone. And my Auntie Evie just mentioned it as, oh yeah, when they had the swing band. And I said, the what? And I went to the library of jazz bands in Montreal. There actually is at Concordia, and I tried to find them, and she couldn't remember the names. But yeah, that's what they did. But what my Auntie Evie told me is that, so they were 4 siblings. She played piano. She was the youngest. So by then they'd saved up some money and they could buy a piano. Sally got the violin. My father got the banjo and guitar, and Jaime got the guitar. But before any of them had any of those instruments, they got a couple of ukuleles to share, nothing else. Because apparently my grandparents thought that they would get cheap instruments first. And if the children really didn't show any inclination to practice or any musical inclination, that's where it would stop. And if they were interested and showed that they could practice, then they could get real instruments. And they did, and so they did. And the only one who kept, well, my father probably would have kept playing, except he died. My Auntie Evie played piano all her life. And when she was in a long-term care home, her last few years, her last 7 or 8 years, I guess, she would still wheel herself in the wheelchair over to the piano and play. And at one point, the nurses decided that they asked her if she wanted to be paid, because she would do it every day and before every meal and whenever she was asked and so on. She said, no, I don't want to be paid. This is just for fun. I'm fine. So they got together, because she didn't use internet, and they bought her a subscription to 2 of her favorite newspapers, a print subscription. And they were delivered straight to her room. And then once she read them, she would pass them on to people. And she said that was the best gift any of them could have given her. But she was the only one who really stayed with it. My father probably would have. Solly's violin ended up in the garage in LA in my cousin's house. And that picture only surfaced in 2014 after his death, when my cousins were going through his stuff.
I double dog dare you to take up your family ukulele tradition again.
I don't like the ukulele, I confess.
And I'm gonna jump in there. We're 7 o'clock, and we need to cap at 2 hours, I think. And Jessica needs to go and feed her son as well.
Oh, thank you, Mateo. You've been so patient. Obrigado, Mateo.
He's in the bedroom. He had a snack, but. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's a good moment to stop anyway, because we need to leave some for Judith to come back and give us part 2 of this session. I think there have been many calls for it, so I'm going to be chasing up when we're done here.
So thanks, Jessica, for keeping me on point. And by the way, I didn't get to say this, but I do want to take a minute and tell you to go and look for Jessica's work, or have her come and be featured on another one, because not only her work on Judeo-Spanish song and context and performance is really fascinating and innovative, but her subsequent work with Ashkenazim and with anthropology and politics and women and gender studies and all kinds of things. So, really have a look at what Jessica's doing, which I should have said a long time ago. Thanks, I can't even believe sometimes that you're that very, very bright, sweet student I met with Hervé Rotin, whom you'll see next week at COZ all those years ago.
Thanks so much, Judith. Thanks, Phil, for inviting me to interview Judith. It was a great honor. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody.
Actually, I invited you.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to both of you. We'll see you all hopefully next week. Thanks, Judith. Thanks, Jessica.